Okay, I think we can get started. Boker Tov. I'll probably make the share a little bit shorter today if that's making everybody else wait. But anyway, all right. Listen, what am I supposed to say to start? We should just pray to Hakadosh Baruch Hu that the situation in Israel should be good. I think everybody's happy and nervous at the same time. My son told me he's 30,000 people. He's living in Israel already filled out a sort of a poll. How do you feel, happy or nervous? I said, what do you mean? You can be both. So that's, I think, the situation. I think, as I was saying earlier, it's unbelievable. You hear the stories of what the Mossad was doing. It's, I don't know, Mina Shemaim, but let's just daven it should be well. And as I wrote, coincidentally or not, yes, I'm not like one of these people, everything, yeah, there are no coincidences, but still, we're up to the Sim Shalom, or for the finishing Birchas Kohen, going into Sim Shalom. So I think that's sort of an appropriate topic for today, obviously. Okay, just let's pick up a couple points on Birchas Kohanim. We were discussing last week the minhag of the Ramah quotes, that we don't say Sim Shalom outside of Israel except on Yom Tov because you can't be happy. And because he said it economically that people living in Chutz La'aretz and are very concerned about their income, and all they're worrying about is, and he doesn't mention the anti-Semitism so much. He just mentioned how difficult it is to earn a living. And although I mentioned Ramah himself came from a very wealthy family, and therefore the custom it's a very difficult custom, and that's a custom the Ashkenazi community, I think, pretty much everywhere observes, that they only duchen on Musaf, on Yontif. And with that, it's the same reason that some people, this already have different customs, and Avel, a mourner, doesn't duchen because the mourner is not in a state of happiness. And in order to bless somebody with love, you have to be in a state of happiness. Okay, that's just pretty much what we were talking about last week. But I just want to go, I don't think I mentioned this. We'll go through the bracha relatively quickly, and then we'll move on to Sim Shalom. So Yivarech Hashem, it's basically, I mean, we read it last week. It was last week's, Parsha, of course. So we go 3, 5, 7 words, that basically six blessings, as we'll see, the correspondence in Sim Shalom. We'll see it's pretty obvious that Sim Shalom is really just the extension of Birchas Kohanim, and really, I mentioned, though, is Birchas Kohanim the end of a modim or the beginning of next bracha? It's sort of nishtahi nishtaher, because it doesn't have a bracha at the end. So but obviously it seems to be, although different Siddurim put it differently as sort of the conclusion or the beginning of Sim Shalom. But it seems to be, we'll see the parallels to Sim Shalom, that it's the introduction to Sim Shalom. But we'll discuss why we only say it at Shachrit, and we don't say it at Mincha and Dwarf. Or in other words, why does only the tzibur say it? You never say it individually, right? The Chazan theoretically repeats the Shemona Esrei, the exact same things we said. So the 100% the same, except here we never say this. And then the Chazan only says it at Shachrit. So then we'll get to, please God, in a couple minutes. But the bracha itself, 357, Yivarech Hashem v'yishmerecha. That's the bracha, Yivarechecha v'yishmor. God should bless us and guard us. Ya'er, God should shine light upon us. Yerushem panav elecha. God should shine His face to us. Yichunech, and have grace for us. Chen, and of course, Yisa Shem panav. That's what we're going to read in this week's parsha. That God spoke to Moshe, panim el panim, face to face. The face of God is the idea of knowledge of God. Ye'erashem panav elecha v'yuchanecha. So in the context of the bracha, it means that God should be nice to us. Chen is sort of loving kindness. God should shine His light upon us, means that life should be good for us. So that means God is shining His light. But on the literal sense, of course, Panav, the only person to speak to God face to face in our tradition, it is Moshe Rabbeinu. It's mentioned twice in the Chumash. It's mentioned this week after Miriam and Aaron complain about Moshe. So God says, we're also prophets. Well, why do we? Well, I discussed it actually a little bit in my podcast, that this theme. But what was Moshe? Let's take the explanation of Rashi. Why does Moshe have to divorce his wife? To speak to God. We too We do our prophets and we speak to God, and yet we don't have to divorce our spouses. So God said, "Lo kein avdi Moshe." Moshe is different for Soloveitchik has a beautiful analysis of this. Moshe is totally unique. It's not just different. He's like in a different ballpark, and of course, Lo kein avdi Moshe, pel pe adaber bo. I speak to him face to face, unlike all the other prophets. The Rambam puts this as one of his principles of faith, that there is prophecy, and that Moshe is the greatest of all the prophets. I think that's number 7, if I'm not mistaken. That Moshe is the greatest of the prophets. It's not enough to believe in prophecy, and it's not enough to believe that Moshe was a prophet. You have to think Moshe was fundamentally different than any other prophet, and of course, he's the only one who is supposed to separate from his wife. Normally, that's not a good thing, but Moshe had a different relationship with God. And of course, the Torah repeats it in Bezot HaBracha at the end of the Torah, that when the Torah is sort of giving the last few psukim is the eulogy really on God's writing on Moshe Rabbeinu, that he's so amazing, that God spoke to him face to face. But the Panah means that God shows favor. Yivarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. So Yivarecha is to bless us. I always like to quote this. I don't know when I last quoted it here. Somebody's just running. The attack on Iraq took place on Parshat Balot Chai. Well, we're talking in the car now. The attack on Iraq took place, if I'm not mistaken, on the second day of Shavuot. I remember it. It's 1981. I was walking to shul, I think, and that's when somebody told us that Israel had bombed a nuclear reactor in Iraq. So that would have been before Parshat Naso, I think, if I'm not, because we always read Naso after Shavuos, unless you're living in Israel and it's the year when Pesach, last day of Pesach on Shavuos. We're not going to go there. But yeah, this time of year. But anyway, sorry about that. Yivarecha, that God should bless us. What does V'yishmerecha mean? What does it mean, V'yishmerecha? God should guard us. We'll guard us from what? Yeah, from missiles from Iran, of course. But in the context of the bracha, when the Kohanim are blessing us, Yivarech Hashem v'yishmerecha. So what does v'yishmerecha mean? So I love the explanation of the Netziv, the 19th century Rosh Hashiva in Velazhin. So the Netziv says that God should bless us and guard us. We have to be guarded from our blessings, because very often a blessing can turn into a curse. So he gives, I believe, 2 examples. As for example, a business person, he wants to make a lot of money. That's why he goes into business. He wants to do well, wants to support his family, have money to give for charity, etc., etc. So the blessing is that his business should do well. He should do well. And what's Vishmeracha? He shouldn't have the curse of wealth. That wealth can be a terrible thing. It's all how you use it. It can make you arrogant, as we all know. We all know that the blessing can turn into a curse. But then, what more? I don't want to say insightfully, it's rather obvious, I guess, but it needs to be said, and it's important that a great Rosh Hashiva says it, that sometimes Torah learning can be a curse. That sometimes people can learn Torah. Yivarech Hashem. You're learning in yeshiva. You want to be a great Torah scholar. That's wonderful. But you have to make sure the Torah doesn't ruin you either, because Torah scholars have the tendency to become arrogant. Also, it's the same way people with money have a tendency to, I have money, I'm special, and the community honors you. And, of course, if you give money, they make a dinner, I don't have to tell you. And so it's the same thing in learning. People, he's an Amar, they're an ignorant person. They look down upon other people. Elitism, in matter of fact, that's what many of the scholars say. What moved the Hasidic movement to grow like wildfire is the non-Hasidic world was, the world of the Vilna Gaon, so to speak, was an elitist world. And even if it didn't look down on people, the Hasidic world had the ability, mass appeal. But the Netziv writes that you have to make sure your Torah doesn't turn you arrogant, or, I'll say the other thing I like to, I mentioned, Mark Shapiro, put out a book recently on Rav Kook, which I highly recommend. I remember when I was in Yeshiva HaKotel over 40 years ago, seeing a statement in the name of Rav Kook that you should never let Torah defeat your natural sense of being a moral person. In other words, if you know something's wrong, instinctively, your moral gut tells you it's wrong. Don't tell me, well, there's a tosfot in Bava Kama, you tray like this. Really, the halacha is not like this. The halacha is like this and that. It reminds you that Rav Lichtenstein wrote once, if I remember correctly, that he was shocked once he came to Israel. It was soon after he made Aliyah. And there was some serious accident, unfortunately, on Shabbos or something. A non-religious Jew, obviously, was driving a motorcycle, and a very serious accident. So if I remember correctly, but the point is, even if I don't remember the story exactly, the idea was that these yeshiva boys were having a whole machloket. Can you save a non-Jewish life on Shabbos? A chakira here and there and there, and like it's sort of like you see somebody who's sick, you save them, and you don't use halacha to go around. So what Rabbi Lichtenstein commented there was, it upset him that they would have such a conversation, but it also upset him that in the modern Orthodox world, people wouldn't know the Gemaras that they were quoting to have the discussion, like whatever. But the idea that sometimes people can use Torah as a way to get around moral issues. He's a malek, you use all kinds of drains, or in the business world, it's whatever, it's Gnei Vasakmim, it's this and that, and they come with all kinds of shtick. I don't know what other word to use. So that's what the Nitziv is saying. Yivarach Hashem Yishmerecha, that whatever blessings you have to make sure the blessings don't turn into a curse. I think that's a very powerful idea, an important idea. Okay, that's the Yivarach Hashem Yishmerecha, Yerushem Panav Elecha V'Yichunecha. God should shine His light, it's His face, and of course the last bracha, Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yasem Lecha Shalom, that God should lift up, naso. It's interesting. The Hebrew word, last week's parsha, naso, yisa, to lift up. That's why that's what it means, to raise up. That's why a president, or in the Israel, the tribal leaders in the desert are nisi'im. And nasi just means somebody who's lifted above, who's the leader of the community. So a king is referred to. I mean, there's a melech, there's a nasi, but those are the leaders of the people. So again, Yisa Hashem, and He should, of course, grant us peace, which, of course, is the most important blessing that one can ever have, as we're going to now see, and we're going to end the Shmon Esrei in Sim Shalom, like a powerful ending. So I just want to quote one. So obviously, you just see from the opening words of Sim Shalom, we end Birchas Kohanim with the word of Shalom, and then we begin Sim Shalom, and we also have the same thing, a year or Panecha. You see some of the language of Sim Shalom parallels the language that we have in Birchas Kohanim. Okay, but just let me just show you one source here. Just let me get this ready. I didn't. Where are we going here? Okay, let me share my screen. I think I have it open. Okay, so this is the last Mishnah in all of Shas. So we know the Mishnah begins Shema Arvit. The Mishnah begins with the recital of Shema. That's in itself a fascinating reason why. Whatever, just very, very briefly now. Of course, the Shema is the acceptance of God. So it makes sense. That's the opening line of the Mishnah. I'll say something else. I'll tie into Israel. Like, what's the answer of the Mishnah? What's the earliest time you can say Shema? So what does the Mishnah say? Anybody want to pipe in if they'd like to? So the Mishnah says, Mishasha kohanim nichnasim lechol b'trumatam. That the time you eat, the earliest time to say Shema is when you see the Kohanim going in to eat Truma. Truma was the 2%. That was the recommended amount that the farmer gave to the Kohen. The Kohen didn't have any land, and Truma could only be eaten by a Kohen, a non-Kohen, and his family, including if he had a non-Jewish slave. His family could eat from Truma, and but they had to be in a state of purity. So had the Kohen gone to a funeral or come in contact with some form of impurity, they couldn't eat Truma. So he'd be excited. The Kohen would be excited to eat Truma when the impurity ends. So the law was they could go to the mikveh in the afternoon. Let's say every day starts at night. So, but you were allowed to go to the mikveh at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it got dark at 8 o'clock at night. So the Kohanim would go the first second that they could eat truma. So mishasha kohanim nichnasim lacho b'trumatam. That when you see the Kohanim running to eat truma, they know Kohanim are Zrizim. Kohanim are the most meticulous. They're in the Beit Hamikdash. So that must be the earliest time. So then I can say Shema. So it's very nice, but the Mishnah was written in the year 220. The last time a Kohen ate Truma was 150 years earlier. It's very give me when sunset is. Don't give me some convoluted answer that has zero applicability. But clearly, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wanted to begin the Mishnah with a reference to the land of Israel. That this is like a hopeful thing. We say teku. When you have a question in the Talmud and you don't know the answer, so it says teku. What does teku mean? So I don't know if you were taught like I was taught in grade 8. What does teku mean? New Susan, you want to say? I don't hear you. Tishbi Yataritz Kushot Vabayitz. It's an acronym. Teku Tat Tishbi Elionavi Yataritz will answer Kushot difficulties Vabayit. Questions he'll respond to them. That's not what Teku means. Teku means it will stand. We don't know. Teku means we don't know what to do. So that's a question. So what do you do when you don't know what to do? But in order to give the Jewish people sort of hope for the future in the exile, Eliyahu Navi. Every day, whenever you have a problem in the Talmud, don't worry, Eliyahu Navi is going to come. It's not what and it's not even true, because if you know the Mishnah Adia, it makes it very clear. Lo ba'letame u'letaher. Eliyahu Navi is not coming to answer questions of who's pure, who's impure. They're not allowed to. A Navi, a prophet, is not allowed to be a rabbinic authority. That's the rabbi's job. The Navi's job is to be a spokesperson for God, to give God's message. But actual practical halacha has to be issued by the rabbis, especially someone who hasn't been alive for 2,000 years, whatever. So the Mishnah says Eliyahu Navi is not coming to answer halachic questions. So it's a very nice idea, and we're all taught it. But it's important to teach what it really means, and then it's important to understand how Jewish tradition uses this beautiful concept. So I think it's the same idea here. When we begin the Mishnah, we talk about Shema, acceptance of God, but we want to start right away at the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, that's the beginning of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah, which that lots of people learn. Brachot, even Daf Yomi, everybody gets excited every 7.5 years, so they're going to start Daf Yomi. So they get the brachas, maybe, the first few pages, and then it gets hard. And, I include myself, of course, when I say this. The last Mishnah, Uksin, which has no Gemara. A lot of people I believe only 37 tractates of the 63 have a Gemara associated with them. When you learn Daf Yomi, you're learning less than half of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the basis of the Gemara. The Mishnah is the oral law, but it's 6 starring, 4,192 Mishnayot. The Gemaras that we have cover less than half of the Mishnayot. So important to know, when you learn Daf Yomi, you haven't even learned the entire Talmud, even if you know every word in Daf Yomi up by heart. So the last Mishnah, the last Seder is Tahara, talks about purity, so it's not applicable. When the Talmud was made in Bavel, the rabbis didn't waste time talking about things that had no applicability. That's why it's Ryan, Truma, Maser, Shemitah. There's no Talmud Bavli. There's a Talmud Yerushalmi. Because you lived in Israel, Truma is important. So you had to know the laws, not to the same extent, but there's Gemaras on them. There's no Talmud Bavli. The Babylonian rabbis didn't spend time on Truma and Zvach. There is on Korbanos. That's for a different reason. There is for Korbanos because the Gemara says when you learn Korbanos, it's as if you brought it. There's actually a teaching that that's why Rabbeinu Yonah says every morning when you daven, you're supposed to say at least the Korban Tamid. Say Korbanos in the morning is a biblical mitzvah. That somehow saying Korbanos, unlike any other mitzvah, is like bringing Korbanos. So the rabbis, even in Babylon, there's a Gemara on Zvachim. It's very interesting. Why people, why is there Zvachim Nachum? There's nothing in Zeraim except Brachot, and nothing in Taharat except for Nida. So most of Torah, which is boring and it's hard for us to relate to, and it's all these complicated concepts and what's considered a room. Oh, look, whatever. And you're stuck at a shlosh, and somebody has to learn Kalim, 30 chapters, sometimes divided into 3. What kind of vessel? This can pure, impure. It's not exciting stuff. Okay. But in the time of the Mishnah, it was in time of the Beit HaMikdash, it was important. So the last Mishnah is Uksin. Well, what's Uksin? It's like the etrog. You have the Pittam and the Oketz, whatever. So the last Mishnah, the last tractate in Shas, maybe some of you have heard this. If you go to a siyum on all of Shas, so the person making the siyum will usually, not always, sometimes they'll pick another seder, but if you're really doing it on, the six orders, so the last words of the Mishnah is Amar Rav Shimon ben Chalafna. God did not find any vessel that can hold blessings for the Jewish people except peace. That is the idea that the greatest blessing, the only blessing really, the only, in other words, without shalom, you can't have any other blessings. That's what like the Otzer Tfilat Siddur says, Sim Shalom Tova Ubracha. So he says, without Shalom, you can't have any Tova. If there's no peace, there's no good. So it seems Shalom, and then once there's Shalom, Tova, Bracha, Pain, Chesed, Rachamim. So this is how the Mishnah ends. The last words of the Mishnah, all this learning, everything is wonderful, great, but without peace, we're up the creek, which we all know. So that's a very important idea, and of course that idea is both internal and external, right? When we daven Sim Shalom, I really never, I don't know, I haven't thought of the question so much, but now that, Baruch Hashem, I can have the scoot you come, so I have to prepare and teach. Is Sim Shalom, is it internal peace or external peace? Are we praying for peace from our enemies, or are we praying for peace of the Jewish people? Is there any way one can tell from the words of Sim Shalom?
No.
It's not so easy, by the way. This question not as easy as it sounds. I mean, maybe it is. I didn't find the question easy. Sim Shalom Tova Bracha Chaim V'Chesed Rachamim. So Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael Amecha. So peace should be upon us. So does that mean internal peace, external peace, both? Both pieces, right? About Barcheno Avinu Kulanu Kechat Bior Panecha, Ki Bior Panecha Natata Lanu, Torat Chaim B'Avat. Torat Chaim already sounds, this is like a Jewish thing, even Avat Chesed, it sounds Staka, Bracha, Racham, Chaim V'Shalom. These already sound very Jewish things. Levarech et Kolam Chai Yisrael. The bracha and V'tov Beinecha, it should be good in your eyes to bless the entire nation of Israel. Bishlomecha, in your peace. In other words, it sounds like developing a relationship with God. We'll come back to this in a little bit. So I don't know if anybody has any comment. There's nothing here that really in other words, it's whatever, it's talking about peace. Maybe it's internal peace, mental health issues. I mean, I think these are not exclusive ideas, but I'm just saying when you look at it, and and I think we instinctively, and for good reason, understand it to be peace. When Yeshayahu says "Lo yisagoy al goy chareb, lo yilmedu ish melchama," he's talking about peace with our enemies, talking about the world peace, right? And but when we talk about in our tefillot peace, it's not necessarily that same theme. You don't have that. I don't know if anybody has any comments, just to throw that out. But the Mishnah begins, and a lot of the commentaries here on the Siddur refers to that last Mishnah in Shas, that that the greatest blessing God can give people is peace, and we know that's, of course, when you have external peace, you need internal peace. The whole, everything. But depends on the situation, and somehow when there's an external threat, we forget about our internal problems. That's good or bad, but that's what happens. Okay, so let me get back to the question of why does only the Chazan say Sim Shalom, and why do we only say it in the morning? So I'll start with the question as I saw it. The Otzer Tfilat Siddur, he says, we say it like this. Okay, Sim Shalom Tova Bracha. God should give us peace. It's not good peace. In other words, the way I just explained, there's like with Egypt, we have it's not the warmest peace in the world. I used to say Canada and the United States were the model in the world for peace. I don't say that anymore, but it's still true to a large extent. It's still, despite the issues, it's hard to think of two countries that have had more peaceful. We crossed the border. I'm always nervous. It's only the second time today that I crossed the border since January 20th. I have a Nexus card. I don't know what it's called in the States, whatever it's called. And you know what? This both times he didn't even ask me how long I'm staying. He didn't ask me why I'm going to the States. He just said, "Do you have anything to declare?" He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "New York." "Do you have anything to declare?" "No, have a nice day." And that was it. Took literally like 2.5 seconds. And it's amazing because you hear these stories, at the border, people are nervous and travel is way down. Anyways, that's not the point. But I'm saying, so Egypt, it's not the same peace that Israel, but Baruch Hashem, there's peace in the whatever. So there is an idea of a good peace. There's sort of a cold peace and a warm peace. But as I heard Beryl Wine say many years ago, I much prefer a cold peace to a hot war, or even for a hot peace to a cold war, however you want to phrase it. So but the way the commentary is saying, it's not that give us a good peace. It seems shalom, comma, tova, give us peace, give us goodness, bracha, blessing, chen v'chesed, rachamim. Well, give us grace. We have to define what is the difference between chen, chesed, and rachamim. But we're asking for 6 different things. That's what I said before. The Birchas Konim has sort of 6 ideas. Yivarecha, b'yishmerecha, Ya'er, Vihunecha, and Yisa, and Shalom. So he said that's what one of the Eitz Yosef commentary said. That's why there's 6 things we pray for here: Shalom, Tova, Bracha, Chen, Chesed, and Rachamim. So we're praying for 6 different things, and those parallel the 6 things we just said in the Birchas Konim. So the question it says Aleinu, on us. So who's Aleinu? Who's Aleinu? Right? So I just want to say, okay, yeah. He says, right. Says like this. So the Otzer Atfilot, commentary on the Siddur, that's which I often quote from. It's a great commentary. Got selected commentaries at the bottom. He begins by saying, hold on a second. When you daven as an individual, you don't say, what do we mean, Aleinu? If you're davening not in a minyan, you're davening at home or on the road to New York, if you're davening and you have to say, you don't say Aleinu because there's nobody else. You should say Alai, Ba'al Kol Yisrael. That's very, very, who would think of that? Like, what do we, Aleinu means if you daven in a minyan, or the Chazan reading Shmona Esrei. So Aleinu refers to the whole community, but if you daven by yourself, you don't say it. Then he says no, even though that might make sense. It says an interesting idea. Shalom, peace, always has to be in reference to your relationship with somebody else. So he's explaining it, and not this mental health, not his internal peace for sure. Maybe peace among Jews, but peace means there's somebody you might not be at peace with. So the Aleinu is referring to your dispute, the person who's arguing with you, who's fighting with you. So that's why he says even in the Aleinu is going on the person who you don't have peace with. So God should grant us and them, the two of us, or the whatever it is, have peace. Now he says like this. The other thing is, how does Birchas Konim end? So, Kot Baruch Hu b'nei Israel, Bani Avarchem, and I will bless them. Right? The Kohanim are the medium through which God blesses us. Right? That's everybody talks about that. What do you mean? The blessings come from God. The Kohanim, and that's why we don't look at the Kohanim. There's this notion that the divine presence, whatever that means, is on the hands of the Kohanim. By the way, Rav Schechter told us, of course you can look at the Kohanim. That's why they put the talus over their heads. In other words, the Kohanim, when they duchen, put the talus over their head and hands. They do that so when you're looking at them, you don't see their hands. It's not that you have to turn away from the Kohanim. You're not supposed to see, but okay, that's our custom, which a lot of people, I think now it's better than it used to be when I was younger. A lot of people, especially in living outside of Israel, so Birchas Kohanim is rare. Sometimes people, they don't want to look. They so don't want to look. They turn their back to the Kohanim. So I think a lot of people know that's not allowed. I mean, not allowed. That whatever means the blessing doesn't work. It's got to be panim el panim. God spoke to Moshe face to face. Okay, but when we speak to other people, it has to be face to face. Somebody's blessing you and you're turned their back on them. So that's why it has to be, you have to face the Kohanim. That's why they put the talus over there. Okay, so people look down. All right, look down. Fine, do as you please. But it's really not a problem to look at the Kohanim. So, anyways, but it says Vaniyav Archem, and God will do the blessing. So he says like this. He says so. There's a debate. Vaniyav Archem, is that referring to the Kohanim, or is in other words, that the Kohanim will be blessed, or the Bnei Israel will be blessed? So of course it's Bnei Israel. So that's a debate in the Gemara between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. If this is a bracha for the Kohanim, the Birchas Kohanim is the bracha for the Kohanim. So of course we do both. Va'ani abarkem. So Aleinu, that's what he explains. He continues to explain that the Aleinu, what's following on the Birchas Kohanim. So the Kohanim are saying Sim Shalom. Sim Shalom is really the blessing of the Kohanim. The Kohanim have asked God to say V'yasem Shalom, and then they say Sim Shalom Aleinu, Sim Shalom Tova Bracha Aleinu, on us the Kohanim, who are giving the blessing, and of you, the Jewish people, who we are blessing. We're God's emissary to bless you. That's such a very, I never really thought of that, like very, very interesting that in essence, the Sim Shalom is said by the Kohanim. I don't know if it literally said, or it's the expression of what the Kohanim are doing when they're blessing for Shalom. So that's what the Aleinu is going on. Both us and on the Kohanim. Okay. Now, what's the difference between? Okay, so there is Shalom and Tova. Good. You have to have peace before you have anything. The Eina Kadosh Baruch Hu, Matzah Kli, the bracha, the blessing of the Jewish people has to be peace. That's the be all and end all. Once you have peace, then you can look for other things. So Tova, Tova ubracha, okay, blessings. What's the difference between chen, chesed, and rachamim? So I can't say I have a good answer to this exactly. I don't know if there is, and I couldn't find if the Malbim says something. You mentioned in the past the Malbim. That's who's the Malbim? Mayor, I forget his name. Ben Yisrael Malbim. It's an acronym. I forget it. Malbim. I know. I forget his name now, which isn't good. But the Malbim, who lived in the 19th century, wrote a commentary on the Chumash. A very interesting commentary. He does like the Abarbanel does, but he learned from the Abarbanel much shorter. He asks questions and then he gives answers. But he was he put a lot of efforts into explaining words. What's the difference between Sason and Simcha? And he's always explaining the differences between words that are similar. And he'll show you very beautifully how this word appears in these 12 verses and that's in those 10 verses, because the verse has a slightly different connotation and the words are not just, stum words. So that was his one of his specialties. By the way, people I'm sure don't know this. He was, I shouldn't say that, but he was, they wanted to bring him as the chief rabbi of New York. Baruch Hashem, that didn't work out. He was lucky. Because, the story, New York City had one chief rabbi in its history, Rav Yaakov Yosef, and talk about a disastership, this was a total disaster. Chief rabbis don't work in the United States of America. As I forget, there was somebody else who claimed he was the chief rabbi. Thank you very much. Mayor Levush Ben Yechiel Mayor. Thank you very much. He lived in Romania, and this other rabbi, I forget his name, came. He had a sign on his office, Chief Rabbi of New York, so of America, I think. So they asked him, "Who made you the chief rabbi?" He said, "The paint signer, the guy, the painter." That's Rabbi Yaakov Yosef was really that's RJJ, the school from him. He was the preacher in Vilna. He was like he was like the main person who spoke in shul. So Dayan, an amazing person. They brought him to New York, and it was mamash a disaster because the Malbim was one of the persons they considered, but to be anyways. But so what is the difference? Anybody want to venture a guess? So of course they mean similar things, obviously. But what is any specific difference between chen, chesed, and rachamim? Which, by the way, this expression appears throughout our liturgy. It appears in Birchat Hamazon. Hazanat Olam Kulo B'Chein B'Chesed of Rachamim. Hu notein lechem l'chobas areit in Birchat Hamazon. It appears twice in Birchat Hamazon. Helavinu Malkeinu Adivenu Goleni Lecheinu Chesed El Rachamim L'Rava Chatzala V'Sacha Bracha. It appears in Yikum Purkan China Chista V'Rachami, and it appears in Kaddish. The Rabbanan. So this is a very common phrase that we have in our tradition. So we ask God for Chen, Chesed, and Rachamim. So anybody want to? I'd like to hear. I don't have. I'll tell you the little I can come up with. But if anybody else has other ideas, I'd love to hear.
Maybe if we deserve it, or even if we don't.
Okay, so that's right. So Rachamim sounds like it could be Rachamim is.
I'm not sure which is which, but.
Yeah, no. So Chen is normally translated as grace, like as grace. Or we have this notion that I don't quite understand what some of the commentators were saying. That we have this notion like a chut shel chesed, that God gives us a chesed is when you have when you really care about the person. You want to say charisma in a certain sense. The person, when the Torah says that Esther had a chut shel chesed, or the Gemara says if you learn Torah at night, God gives you a chut shel chesed. The idea that you're appealing, like, wow, I really like you. Like chesed is, okay, we think of chesed, which is also true, gemilut chasedim, acts of kindness. And what's a chasidah? What a stork, right? The animal. Because it puts the bird on top of it. That's Russia have that whole thing because it flies with the baby on top of it. So if it gets shot by the arrow, there won't. It isn't there a Russia like that?
It's the eagle. You're thinking about the stork who shares his food, but only with its own kind.
Oh, right. That's the opposite. That's the opposite. I'm sorry. Thank you. I need to. Great. Thank you for that correction. Right. So chesed, some say chesed implies where there's love. Rachamim is never I have mercy. I don't really care about the person, but I have mercy on the person. There is for sure. Some want to say that here I had it. What that? Some want to say v'yichunecha, that in the Birchas Kohanim v'yichunecha. So it's interesting, like you say. The Mefarshim say even if I'm not worthy. Which one is which? They don't really know, but that's one idea. That one is when we are worthy, when we're not worthy. I would say, hold on, that I want to say that chesed is focused on the person doing the act, and I think rachamim is focused on the recipient. In other words, chesed is something we do to, because it has to be done. It's very important. Rachamim is something that's done to somebody who's in need. We can do, again, I don't know if this is like 100% type of a distinction, but the idea is that Rachamim were focused on the recipient, Chesed were focused on the giver. Like in Staka, right? There are two mitzvot in Staka. There's the mitzvah for the person to give, but there's also, in other words, what is the mitzvah of tzedakah? For you to give or the person to receive? What's the difference? You send a check. This comes up all the time. You send a check to charity and they never cash it. Did you fulfill? You have no idea. You don't even know till 6 months later. You're doing a background. Your accountant points out at the year end, this check never cleared. You wrote a check for $1,800 to some charity, and the charity never cashed a check. And you I don't know, whatever, it's Rosh Hashanah in the interim. You sent the check before Rosh Hashanah, and now God, apparently tefillah tzedakah, tefillah tshuva tzedakah. Is that tzedakah? So, or the money, or money falls out of your wallet, you lose and a poor person picks it up. So you have no intention to give tzedakah, but you gave tzedakah. So are they both stuck? Is neither stuck? It's a very interesting question. So obviously the answer, it's on the one hand, it's hard to say that because $100 fell out of my pocket and a poor person, I did staka. It's hard to say that, but if you look at it, well, I gave $100 to somebody else. So what? I didn't have kavana. We know mitzvah don't need kavana. Mitzvah should have kavana. I don't know, but here he had no knowledge. On the other hand, to say, well, I wrote a check for $1,000, that's wonderful, but they didn't cash it. So what tzedakah did they do? So that's what I mean. There are two elements to tzedakah. Both are important. The question is, what defines the mitzvah? I don't know. But anyway, so that's the chesed is what you do, and the rachamim is done to the other person, which now,
Rabbi,
yeah.
when the night I get
You have to speak louder. You know, I'm in the loud. I mean, there's nobody near me, but I'm sure because no one wants to come
okay.
near me. But
When
it's hard for me to hear. There's sort of background noise.
when I see the check, do I have any for tzedakah? Do I have any halakhic responsibility
So that's a very good question. I mean, if you send a
to
check,
ensure that it gets cashed?
right? Presumably, if you sent the check for $1,800, you wouldn't then say, "Oh, I'm glad you didn't cash it." Like I would assume. No, I'm saying you never know, or you didn't find out, and then let's say, I mean, this is rare, but in theory, it can happen. A guy sends a check for $100, $1,800. It doesn't get cashed, and then the stock market crashes. He doesn't have the money, and the check bounces a year later or 6 months, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Or right. So did he give tzedakah? That's a very interesting question. He gave the check with full intention. And Nebuch, by the time they cleared the check 3 months later, he had a reversal of fortune. The tariffs destroyed his business or whatever it is. These things do happen. They really do happen. So is that still tzedakah? So again, now what is the so maybe you want to argue on what is tzedakah, a mitzvah between man and man, but every mitzvah between man and man is also a mitzvah between man and God. So maybe he fulfilled the man and God part because that was his intention. The man to man part he didn't fulfill because the person didn't get the money. I don't know. I'm just throwing out this idea. But
No, but my question is a little bit different.
I would think you should follow up if they don't
Do
cash
I
it.
have a do I have a responsibility when I give tzedakah to look on my statement?
I think you have a
And
financial responsibility whenever you spend money to see where your money is going. Hakadosh Baruch Hu chasam mamonim shel Yisrael. So you got to fill out your tax return accurately. Not, of course, for halakha, because of you can't cheat on your taxes, but forget cheating on your taxes. You pay all your taxes. You have to know where your money is. You can't just throw out money. The bal tashkit, like that's we have halakhic principles. We discussed it a few weeks ago. Hilchot kashrut change depending on how much money you have. Because that sounds strange to people. But in other words, we'll be strict. But if it's going to cost the money, we won't be strict. No. So I think a Jew always has a responsibility to make sure his finances are. He knows how much money they have, how much they can afford. I'm talking. I was an accountant for 10 years. I'm talking like an accountant as if I do this myself. I'm not so good at this myself all the time either. But to reconcile your bank every month, and you have to be on top of a little bit, not crazy. They say stock advisors say don't look at your stock portfolio more than once a month because you go crazy every day. You invest for the long term. Okay, I'm not here to give investment advice, but believe me, I don't think Warren Buffett checks every day how Berkshire Hathaway thing. He invests for the long term. And Baruch Hashem, I wish I would have invested with him 30 years ago. I'd be a multi-million. Giving him $10, I'd be a millionaire, by now. But anyways, no. So I think you do. But to answer specifically in stock, that would be true too. But okay. I just wanted to the flip side of rachamim. We were saying now rachamim is sort of nebech, and maybe the person doesn't deserve it. You have pity on somebody. That's how we normally define it. You have pity on a person. Chesed, but we know that the word rachamim comes from the word rechem, which I guess it does tie in. That's a rechem is a womb because the greatest act of rachamim of pity is not really the right word. The mother's not pity. The act of love and concern, that's more like the chesed, the loving kindness is a mother to a child. There's no greater aspect of love than a mother has towards a child. So rachamim and rechem go together. So I guess in a certain sense, when we ask for rachamim, we talk about avinu, barcheinu avinu, kulanu kechad. God is our father, but we know there's a father and a mother. And the Gemara says human beings tend to honor their mothers more because their mothers are nicer. And typologically, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the father is more motherly and the motherly is more fatherly. But the Gemara says the father's a disciplinarian. He teaches Torah. He's a disciplinarian. And the mother bestows love. And Rav Soloveitchik, I should maybe for next week, I'll bring it that beautiful quote, Rav Soloveitchik, when he talks about I think it's his eulogy for his mechatenis, the Talmud Rebbetzin, where he talks about the difference between his mother and his father, how his father taught him Hilchot Shabbos, how to keep Shabbat. His mother taught him the beauty of Shabbat. I almost cry when I read it. It represents it so beautifully. How his mother, his father taught him halacha, like how you have to, but his mother taught him how to be Jewish. His mother taught him what it means to be Jewish, the feelings, the warmth of Yiddishkeit, and that's sort of the Gemara's tradition. That's why it says kabed et avicha and ebedimecha, and tira by on fear. It's your mother comes first, because our natural instinct is to love our mother more, because our mother's nicer, and the mother's rachmanas on us. The father can get good minion, and the mother says, "Let him sleep in. He's tired." Right? The mother is that's her role. That's how it should be. And the father's the disciplinarian. So there's these two distinct roles. Of course, we need both. Both are important. And that's the beautiful shot Rav Soloveitchik has on Yitzchak, right? Ela told that Yitzchak ben Abraham holidat Yitzchak. That's a repetitive verse. First of all, I've known already for 10 chapters that Abraham, not for 10 chapters, but for a few chapters, this is in told that I know already in Va'era and Chayesara, Yitzchak's already married. So when are you telling me Ela told that Yitzchak ben Avram? We know this very well. So, and then why does it say Avram will lead at Yitzchak? So Rashi has the comment, all the scoffers were saying, May Avimelech nita brasavra. Okay, Sarah, everybody knows Sarah's the mother. She's walking around pregnant. She gave birth, fine. But the father, that was really Avram's 100 years old. He's not going to be the father. It was Avimelech. When Avimelech took in Sarah, made her pregnant. So this is ridiculous. Whether it's out of his mind. A mother of 90 can have a kid, and a father of 100 can't. In other words, everybody agreed the mother can have 90. So I've had a kid. So what's the big deal? A father of 100? Like, what, they're crazy? And we know even nowadays a father could have a kid at 100. So what were the scoffers saying in this sense? Or Soloveitchik saying so beautiful. So Rashi says Avraham Aliti tells us Yitzchak looked like Avraham. He was a spitting image of his father. So when they walked in the street together, it's Yitzchak. Abraham really is the father. He just looked just like his father. So Rav Soloveitchik says that the Gemara is not telling what he looked like in the mirror. The Gemara is telling us that people said Yitzchak, he'll eat gefilte fish on Shabbos. He'll have a Pesach Seder. He'll have the family over. He'll like Hanukkah candles, beautiful. The warmth of Judaism. That, of course, they'll tell it. But Abraham, the discipline, Hilchot Shabbos, to be so strict, and you can't carry, and Kashan, you got to worry about the Bishul Akum. Oh God, don't drive me crazy with all this stuff. The details and the minuet of halakha sometimes. No way he's going to follow. So that was the idea. Avraham Aliti Yitzchak. Yitzchak didn't just take on the mother aspect of Judaism, took on the father. There's such beautiful ideas. I can have to get you read them in the original. I don't say them as well. They're said in the original. So that's the Rechem. That is the mother. So God is our father, but God's also our mother. We always refer to God as our father and our king. So you say the king is harsh, the father's nice, but the mother's even nicer. So God is both our mother figure and our father figure, so to speak, which makes a lot of sense, of course. Because now that's just one more idea here. Okay, so that's but they of course they mean similar things. God should give us. Even all of them really mean the same thing. Tova, bracha, chen chesed rakamim are saying similar ideas, but chen chesed rakamim. What we do say later, and is that avat chesed. We ask for it again. We repeat ourselves later. We say kibior panecha. That's from Birchas Kohanim. Natata lanu Torat Chaim v'avat chesed. That should give us Torat Chaim. We'll discuss that, please God, next week. Avat chesed. So I think it's important just to point out ahavat chesed. We not just to do chesed, you have to love to do chesed, right? You have to. It's one thing to give charity, but you should want to give charity, right? I've discussed a number of times, right? The Torah puts the obligation to give charity im kesef talved ami, if you lend money, right? If you lend money, and then don't charge interest. But that's the obligation to give charity. And Rashi, of course, points out that im doesn't mean if. This is one of the 3 times in Torah when if means when. It means, that's very nice, but give me a break. If the Torah wants to say when, it can say when. It can say ki. It doesn't have to say if. So that's ridiculous. So why does the Torah say im if it doesn't mean it? You always have to ask these questions. Well, why do the rabbis make these drashot that go against the simple meaning of the text? So the Maral beautifully explains, you have to give charity. Of course, it means when, but the Torah doesn't want to write that. The Torah wants you to give charity, not because you have to. You should want to give charity. Im kesef, if it's my choice, I love to do it. And that's really so important about all mitzvot, especially bein adam l'chaveiro, especially to ethics. The Rambam says when it comes to rituals, when it comes to chukim, when it comes to to keeping kosher, where there's no logical reason to keep kosher if the Torah wouldn't have commanded us. So that you should say, I want to eat pork. I wish I could eat pork, but what can I do? The Torah doesn't allow me. That's a famous distinction the Rambam makes. But when it comes to ethical priorities, I'm not a nice person. I'm not honest because it's the law. I mean, that might be true for some people. It's better than not being honest, but you should be honest because you want to be honest. So it's in other words, the highest ideal is not to keep the mitzvah of the Torah. The highest idea is for the Torah to develop a personality of refined character, mitot tovot. The Torah is the means to the end. It's not the the end is the Torah. The Torah is the means to get to this idea, this personality who will love to do chesed. And that's why you have this very strange halacha. This is what we discussed earlier. What's the mitzvah of tzedakah, the giver or the recipient? And obviously it's both, as we described. But the Rambam, when he puts his 8 levels of charity, says that one who gives less with a smile is better than one who gives more without a smile, begrudgingly. So is that only going on the giver, or is that going on the recipient too? In other words, from the giver's perspective, in other words, it's better to give less because you want to. It could even be from the recipient's point of view, because mood, we know when somebody's nice to you and they do you a favor, it's how somebody does something is often more important than what they do. So it is. I think this halakha is deep psychological insight when the Rambam says that it's better, it's a higher level to give less, but with simcha, than more, when they have to twist your arm. That's, I think, deep psychologically true, even for the recipient. That sometimes, there's a limit. I think somebody would prefer, when you're talking to an institution, I think they don't care so much why the person's giving. But when we're talking person to person, it is different, right? The hospital doesn't care if the guy gives they prefer $10 million because somebody twisted their arm than $5 million happily. But when you're giving to an individual person, it's much different. And therefore, the way you give the tzedakah is very important. Okay, I'm gonna just do quickly. We're gonna end a few minutes early, and please God, we can. Usually I end late, so this, and we can get on the road, please God. But just to review very briefly. Okay, we explained how Sim Shalom is really a continuation of the Birchas Kohanim. We discussed a little bit Birchas Kohanim. We have 357, in the wording, but the beginning, the Yivarechecha v'yishmerecha, God should give us blessing, and the blessing shouldn't be a curse. That happens all too often. And God should give us peace, and peace is the most important thing we can have, and God should shine his face upon us. Moshe had a special relationship. When God shone his face to Moshe, it meant they would talk even more than we're talking to each other. We're talking through a computer screen. They were like standing next to each other at Mount Sinai or the Ohel Moed and talking to one another. But the idea that God should show favor to him, just like God should show it as with Rachamim, as a mother to a child. That's the highest level. And even if we're not deserving, we are deserving, we're not deserving. There are all these different Rachamim. But of course, the most important thing is Shalom. That's the kli, that's the vessel that contains all other brachas. There cannot be tova without shalom, and that's how the Mishnah ends. We discussed the beginning of the Mishnah wants to refer us back to the land of Israel, Rabbi Yehuda, and that's who wants to give us hope. Teku, that's a very important Jewish idea. Hope. Maurice Lamb wrote a book. Anybody read his book? It's a very good book. Maurice, that's Norman Lamb's brother, who wrote the book The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning, which Adayom is still the class. 50 years later, no book parallels it in its sort of combination of halakha, and thought the best book, the Jewish way, in that the morning you see it at a shiva, is really everybody should get that. He wrote it in the book less known, called Hope, I think, about giving people. It's very important that rabbis, people, leaders of countries have to give people hope. So anyway, so Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was giving people hope that we'll come back. We are back, and we'll begin as Anders way began. What's going on in Israel? Israel should have much success. That they should continue to defeat our enemies, and our enemies should learn not to be unable to attack. And one day, please God, to actually make peace with us. Okay, just let me take a look at the comment. Took place on Erev Shavuos. I don't think it was. I thought it was on Shavuos. Maybe I remember wrong. I seem to remember I was walking to shul on the second day of Yom Tov with my father. It was Erev Shavuos. So maybe I was walking to shul for Erev Shavuos. Okay. I was younger. But okay. In everyday Hebrew, teku means a tie. Very interesting. I did not know that. Thank you. So did I. It was on Sunday, June 7th, 5th. Okay, thank you for the correction. I need you people to correct all my mistakes. I'm sure I make too many, and if I make any that aren't caught, I apologize. Why did the Germans communicate Sim Shalom during Mincha? Oh, so I didn't get to that point. Okay, you know what? I'll pick up next week. I forgot to answer that. I never said why we said it only at Shachrit. I said the Aleinu, right? I forgot to review that part. The Aleinu is the Kohanim. That maybe you say a lie when you don't daven. You say no, two reasons. Shalom always is peace with another person, and then also Aleinu is both the Kohanim and the Jewish people. In other words, Bani Avarchem, the Kohanim are still blessing us. Sim Shalom Tova Bracha is the Kohanim speaking Aleinu. Bani Avarchem is going on both on the Kohanim and on the Yisraelim, but the Kohanim are saying God should bless us on the Israelim. That's a very nice.
What did you say about the Germans with Mincha Sim Shalom?
No, in Nusach Sfard they say Sim Shalom at Mincha, right?
Yeah,
but they don't do Birchas Koni.
Also,
correct. So I guess I'll answer right. I don't know.
On Shabbos, the minhag in Frankfurt was to say Sim Shalom at Mincha on Shabbos, but not on Yontif because of Kriyas Torah.
Correct.
With Birchas Kohanim, no. But see,
not without Birchas Kohanim.
You can't say right.
Without Birchas Kohanim.
Right.
But just because of Kriyas Torah.
So this
Torah, they said, and also the minhag in Eretz Yisrael is to do that too.
Correct. That is
on
correct.
Shabbos they say Sim Shalom at Mincha, even though Ashkenaz.
Okay.
Not on Yontif.
But the Otzer Hatfilah, this explanation about Aleinu, he then goes on to explain, therefore, we only say it when the Kohanim do Chun, and therefore only at Shachrit. And he actually writes, according to Nusach Ashkenaz, this explains Nusach Ashkenaz, where we only say Sim Shalom, because the Kohanim are, it's continuation. I just said, Yasem L'cha Shalom, Yasem L'cha Shalom, Sim Shalom, Aleinu on us. So it makes sense. You can only say it if the Kohanim, it's such a fantastical, a beautiful idea. So I have to find out for next week how Nusach Sfard explains. He just explained what Nusach Ashkenaz does. Okay, but we have to get back on the highway. I think most of Israel says Sim Shalom Meir Lev with tribute to Elner Rebbitzin. Yeah, a fantastic essay. I'll remember for next week. Please God, we'll show it. And okay, thank you.
I'm corrected. It wasn't Erev Shavuot. I'm sorry.
It was Erev Shavuos, no?
No, it wasn't.
There's
it was not the day.
Okay, everybody look it up. We'll come by next week. Hopefully by next week, there'll be no nuclear.
It was June 7th, 1981.
Yeah, it was second day Shavuos then, right? June 5th. Yeah, so that's the machloket.
June 7th.
Yeah, but they said that's the 5th of Sivan. I have to look it up. Okay. All right, I'm going to run, but thank you very much. And please God, Rabbi Liebtag and Benny Kazunte will be giving their shiur on Sunday morning. Like I say, next week there should be no Iraqi nuclear reactor, no Iranian nuclear reactor. Let us pray for peace for the Jewish people.
Amen.
Ein kli maxi bracha ella hashalom. God only found the bracha peace. We zocha to it. Okay, everybody.
Amen.
Have a wonderful Shabbat, peaceful Shabbat. Be well. Look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Shalom.
Thank you.